Lately, I've been seeing the opinion that the US should not be hosting the World Cup. And there's very valid reasons why people have these concerns right now. Under the current administration, the United States is seeing many immigrants, whether legal or not, being kidnapped and detained by masked men without any due process. Sometimes even just being in their way will result in you being assaulted. And according to the administration, these masked men have been said to have absolute immunity. This was, by the way, after an ICE officer took the life of a woman who was simply trying to drive away as she saw masked men approaching her vehicle. There's also a travel ban for people in countries that have qualified for this year's World Cup. So if you're a Haitian eager to watch your team play in the World Cup for the first time in 50 years, fuck you! Understandably, with how dangerous and discriminatory this country has been as of late, sentiments of changing the host have been expressed by many watching from the outside. And while I agree with those sentiments, that's just simply not gonna happen. And no one should be surprised by that fact, considering the history of this tournament. By the way, to start this year, I've been going to a lot more cafes. This is to improve my productivity and also achieve my goal of 2026, which is actually to overcome the fear of approaching anyone I find attractive. I'm not even kidding. Very daunting task for me, it's something I gotta work on. But at the same time, there is something far, far more worrying than this. Far more worrying than stumbling over your words when you're talking to that 10.
A little bit early, as the people predict. But to be honest,
using the cafe Wi-Fi. Unprotected. Thankfully, that's not really a worry for me because of today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark uses humanized privacy and security solutions to safeguard your data, meaning you can now browse the internet safely without any stress of someone stealing your personal information. With Surfshark, you can also access region-locked content from anywhere in the world, and this year it's even easier as Surfshark now has over 4,500 servers across 140 different locations. That's not the only new stuff this year though. Surfshark now has a feature that can detect email scams. So for people like Toby World, they won't have to worry about losing their channel to a fake sponsor email again. So, have I got you excited now? Well, if so, you can use my link displayed on the video or in the description to get Surfshark for an extra 4 free months. And there's no risk in trying this out because Surfshark has a 30-day money-back guarantee. So use my link surfshark.com/Mac to access region-locked content anywhere in the world and keep your private information safe. And a big thank you to Surfshark, as always, for sponsoring this video. In 1934, we witnessed the earliest forms of sports washing when the World Cup was hosted by Italy. At the time, the country was under a totalitarian dictatorship that promoted a superior race while sending any opposers of the government to camps. The dictator of this regime, Benito Mussolini, loved football, but especially knew its power in influencing the masses. So in preparations for this tournament, he went all out. Existing stadiums were renovated while new venues were created, including one in Turin donning Mussolini's name. Cities were also carefully selected to make sure Italy's quote-unquote fantastic image was the absolute center of attention through the surrounding architecture and propaganda posters. Another way they showed the country's strength was by having every game of the first round not only be played on the same day, but the same time. I'm not kidding. That kind of backfired though, as this saw the average crowd number spread pretty thin throughout the majority of the venues. Thankfully though, there was no such thing as television, so the radio commentators could just say the stadiums were sold out, and no one would bat an eye. However, the country's image wasn't the only thing important. Mussolini himself needed to make sure he was seen as a man of the people. So before the first game, he actually purchased his own ticket in line as a way to cosplay as the common man. He never did this after, by the way, and for the rest of the tournament hung with the royals and higher officers. But of course, the end goal for this propaganda project was to have Italy come out as victors of this whole tournament. While Italy was actually a pretty impressive team in their own right, they allegedly had some help from the officiating. During the semi-final between Czechoslovakia and Germany, the officials allegedly favored calls for the Czechoslovakians because they would be a weaker opponent for the Italians in the final. Czechoslovakia went on to win that game 3-1. Come the final of World Cup 1994, the regime claimed the attendance was full with 65,000 people, all specifically either workers or members of the party. However, one look at any of these images here will easily tell you otherwise. Anyways, after all this nonsense, Italy went on to win the first ever, probably illegitimate title in this tournament's long history. FIFA didn't seem to care much that they allowed an actual fashion regime to post though. In fact, they have a whole page paying homage to the tournament that is still up to this day. Oh, and they also pulled the same shit 44 years later. While Argentina was celebrating its first ever World Cup title in front of a joyous crowd, a couple streets away was a secret camp Argentina's military dictatorship was using to torture and murder prisoners who had been kidnapped off the streets. The disappeared, as the victims were often called, included political dissidents or even normal-going people in the regime deemed suspicious. In total, it is said that the estimated number of people who died or disappeared during Argentina's military dictatorship was around 22,000 to 30,000 in just 9 years. The dictator, Jorge Rafael Videla, didn't care for football much, but knew the tournament could do wonders in distracting people from the horrors happening beyond the stadiums. Because of this, much like Mussolini, Videla spent ridiculous amounts of money on infrastructure and renovations to stadiums. The chair of Argentina's organizing committee saw this getting way too out of hand and eventually planned a press conference to criticize all the things that were going on. He was assassinated before that could happen. Much like Italy also, Argentina's main goal was to win the whole tournament in order to hide their atrocities behind a positive perception of the military dictatorship's strength and image. But unlike Italy, Argentina were a lot more active in their match manipulations. During the whole tournament also, Argentina's games were all conveniently scheduled at night. That way, they knew what were the results beforehand and knew exactly what result they needed to get. And there couldn't be a better example of this than their game versus Peru. This was a Peruvian side that had held the eventual finalist, the Netherlands, to a goalless draw, and Argentina beat them by 6 goals. Rumor had it also that before the game, Videla went into the Peruvian dressing room to tell them how important this tournament was for Argentina. Peru at the time, by the way, was also under a military dictatorship. Despite Argentina going on to win their first World Cup, many of the players who featured on that team have been quite regretful since. Ricky Villa was one of the most vocal after the tournament and once said, quote, "There is no doubt we were used politically." Leopoldo Luca, who scored 4 times in the tournament, lost people he knew to the dictatorship and now believes the tournament should have never been played. Alberto Tarantini also lost many friends to the regime, and during the tournament said, quote, "We're not playing for those sons of bitches up there. We're winning to ease the pain of the people." Later in the tournament, after Argentina's 6-0 win versus Peru, Tarantini shook hands with the dictator, using the hand he had just rubbed his balls with. It took nearly 30 years for the perpetrators of the camp to be tried for some of the most brutal acts the world had ever seen. Meanwhile, FIFA would fund and produce their own propaganda movie, and when confronted by the complexities of the 1978 World Cup, they featured this absolutely golden line.
About Argentina, sir.
The Argentine Mundial will be a great opportunity for all of Latin America. Now, the press go on and on about dictatorships and political prisoners and so on. But as soon as the game kicks off, things change.
In late 2010, FIFA announced that the host of the 2018 World Cup would be Russia. In Russia, concerns about human rights violations are a big topic. If you're a little too vocal with your criticisms of the government, you could be subjected to intimidation, harassment, be jailed, or hell, they could just poison your ass. This is all taken to an even wider extreme in Russia's Chechnya province, where its leader once said, quote, "I have the right to criticize my wife doesn't. My wife is a housewife. A woman should know her place." Russia also forbids any promotion of LGBTQ+, and has no laws that protect members of the community from being victims of hate crimes. And during preparations for the tournament itself, the organizing committee used slave labor from North Korea. These workers lived under awful conditions, had their passports confiscated, and worked extremely long hours without any days off. Elsewhere though, another country was taking exploiting migrant workers to a whole nother level. Before 2020, Qatar's main workforce was brought in through the kafala system. Migrants from abroad would be offered a contract and then be sent over via a sponsor to work for the country. However, the kafala system at the time had absolutely no government regulation whatsoever. So when migrant workers were sent over, the salary they were promised would be significantly less than what was actually offered initially. Passports were also confiscated by this point, so there was no way for any of these migrants to return home. And because a lot of these workers had families back home they needed to financially support, they would be left with no other choice but to agree to the terms. However, agreeing to those terms basically meant signing away your life. Migrant workers were subjected to horrible living conditions and even worse working conditions. Oftentimes they had to work long hours in extremely hot temperatures, which eventually resulted in the over 6,500 deaths of migrant workers between the years of 2010 and 2021. And unlike the other regimes that went without being questioned much by the general public, Qatar was under heavy scrutiny. The government and organizing committee's solution to this was by expressing an openness to global media as a way to say, hey, actually, things are fine. Come see for yourself. In the last couple years leading up to the tournament, the committee would host sanitized visits for journalists that helped sway the attention away from the human rights abuses. This was the type of shit the Nazis were doing for the 1936 Olympics, by the way. And you know what else the Nazis and the Qatari government have in common? They both hate the LGBTQ+ community. So here's the question. Why does FIFA allow all of this evil shit? Simple. It's lucrative. Regimes will spend all the money in the world in order to paint themselves in a more global positive light, and FIFA knows this. What locked in Italy as the host for the 1934 World Cup was a promise to FIFA that they would cover all losses, which at the time was a huge deal for a tournament just starting to grow in global popularity. As mentioned before, Argentina's dictator spent heavily on infrastructure in preparation for 1978, while Russia and Qatar offered the largest budgets up to that point. And these regimes know this works to an extent. In fact, I would say it's even more effective now. With how fast the internet, social media, and even daily life is, it's very easy for things to be forgotten. 2022 is a prime example of this because after a decade of scrutiny, all of that has pretty much been dug under the rug by one of the best World Cup final matches humanity has ever witnessed. I mean, just in general, when you think of the World Cup back in 2022, you don't really think about the preparations and everything beforehand. You see the iconic moments like the third match day of the group stages, Argentina-Netherlands, or as I said before, that insane ass final. Again, none of this is new. All the US is doing is following a very similar playbook that has been used in the past already. It doesn't matter that the media is being censored. It doesn't matter if our own version of the Gestapo is out kidnapping people based on race or even their fucking accent. It doesn't matter if the government is actively trying to intervene in other countries' matters for about the 1 millionth time. It doesn't even matter if it is literally impossible for people in certain countries to see their nation play on the biggest stage. Because at the end of the day, the goal of hosting this World Cup is to make most of the world forget about all of this. And as long as FIFA keeps making that money, nothing's gonna stop it from happening. By the way, we do not need to be doing the fucking regime Olympics, all right? We do not need to be ignoring one's crimes to make a point. Please don't do that. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video because I've been seeing that kind of thought popping around, and as much as I do agree with the sentiment, we gotta be realistic here. We're dealing with FIFA here. But of course though, a massive shout out to all our members, including Janos Balas, German Sayu 7, Jeremiah Owusu Ajimang, Django, Anazir Makalankam, Alex Rod, Kentra Gantra, Saint Terrence, Sylvia Citrus, Cheesebait, Winder Gel, Finn Likes Rugby More, Davox, The Porter Geyser, Wise Orange, Polar Protos, Von Fan, Augustly Owl, Coney Wolves, Ligstab, Matanai, Apollo, Thrilling ADT 13, Los Milos, LeJames Braun, Vecino, Napside, Money Cash Hose, Quantavious Pork, Lilia Lover, Stewed Monk, Red Yellow, Fuxi, MX Sand, Harry Maguire's Left Toenail, Flaquito, Thierry's Thoughts, Kev C, Dominic Griffin, Kyla Krebs, Mohammed Altanib, Nish, Patrick Barley, Rashford God 5, Raspberry Ale, and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to become a member on the channel, there'll be a link down below and up in the annotations. You can follow my Twitter if you want, follow my Instagram if you like, follow my Twitch. Just recently did a watch along stream, hoping to do more, but we'll see. Until then, I'll see you. I fucked that up so much.